Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a classic, Charles Dickens's A Tale of Two Cities, but we're zooming right in on that crucial first chapter.
That's right. We're going to look at it through a few different lenses, uh, literary analysis, the history behind it, the French Revolution, obviously.
And also some really interesting themes Dickens introduces right away, like hidden selves and human connection.
Yeah. The idea is to give you those key insights, those aha moments pretty efficiently without getting totally lost in the weeds.
Exactly. We know you want to get the core understanding quickly, but also thoroughly.
So for this deep dive, we've pulled together some great stuff. There's a critical discourse analysis focusing just on Chapter 1.
Okay.
A study looking at how Dickens uses irony, pragmatically speaking.
Interest.
Plus, materials from a theater company, A Noise Within, giving historical context and character angles.
Yeah.
And we even looked at a Reddit thread and an academic paper on intimacy.
Wow, quite the mix. So our mission then is pretty clear about how this single opening chapter basically launches the entire novel.
How it throws us into that whole historical moment, France and England in the late 1700s.
And how it plants those seeds about secrets and connection that grow throughout the book. Okay, let's get into it.
Let's start with that critical discourse analysis, the CDA. Basically, CDA looks at how language works in society, how it shows power dynamics.
Right, like how words aren't just words, they carry weight.
Exactly. And this analysis shows how Dickens, right from word one, uses language to expose those massive economic gaps.
It's not just saying rich and poor, is it? It's in the actual words he chooses.
Precisely. The analysis points out Chapter 1 sets the whole framework, the mood, the tone, prepping you for everything else.
Like laying the groundwork for the drama to come.
And it's really striking how he shows the difference between the, super wealthy and the desperately poor in both France and England.
He uses some pretty harsh terms, doesn't he? The analysis mentions things like the rats and the common wretches.
Yeah, really dehumanizing language. The CDA argues this isn't accidental. It actively shapes how we see these groups.
And that feeling of unfairness, that huge disparity, it kind of bubbles under the surface, right? The analysis suggests it's directly pointing towards the French Revolution.
You can feel the tension building. The analysis also highlights the orientation part of the chapter. It's structured carefully to ease you into the world.
A smooth transition, not just dropping you in cold.
Right. And the timing, 1775, is stated clearly at the start and end of the chapter. It anchors the whole story.
He even uses little contemporary details like Mrs. Southcott's prophecies.
Yeah, to really ground it in that specific time. And it's not just time, it's place, too. He immediately sets up this back and forth between England and France.
Like they're two sides of the same coin almost. Their fates linked.
Exactly. The analysis talks about synagmatic links, the connections in the writing, like using it before defining it as the year that's cataphora.
Or repeating both for England and France, or she for France and Anaphora.
And those hints of the future, woodman, fate,
Yeah.
farmer, death, the tumbrils, that's prolepsis, little glimpses ahead.
Okay, this is fascinating. The analysis brings up the contrast right at the start. Hope versus despair.
Best of times, worst of times. Wisdom, foolishness, spring of hope, winter of despair. It's this huge paradox reflecting the era.
So why start with such extremes, do you think?
Well, it immediately throws the core conflicts into sharp relief, doesn't it? The analysis links hope initially to characters like Darnay and Minette, maybe.
And despair more with the struggling lower classes.
Right. But then as the revolution kicks off, that despair kind of shifts, engulfs the upper class too. It's dynamic.
And Dickens's actual word choice, his diction, the analysis, says it gives a comfortable orientation. That sounds a bit strange, given the subject matter.
Well, maybe comfortable as in familiar, guiding. Even though the themes are heavy, his narrative voice pulls you in gently, perhaps.
Okay, that makes sense. And he uses metaphors like season of light, season of darkness.
Powerful imagery.
Yeah.
And metonymy, English crown and people, meaning the king and queen. These aren't just decorations, they drive the story.
And we can't forget the irony, even in paragraph 2.
Oh yeah, the analysis notes the line about matters being perfectly clear to the state officials when things are actually a total mess. Classic Dickens.
So the big picture from the CDA perspective.
It really shows Chapter 1 as this incredibly deliberate construction. It sets up the themes, the history, the future plot points, all making it easier for us to get what's going on.
Okay, that's a great way to look at the structure. Now let's shift to that pragmatic study of irony. Irony is more than just saying the opposite, right?
Much more. This study looks at it as a communication strategy in the novel. It argues Dickens uses irony with real pragmatic force. It makes the reader work a bit to get the real meaning.
Reading between the lines.
Exactly, and it distinguishes irony from lying. A lie hides the truth, but irony, the study says, kind of encodes the truth within the context. It's subtler.
Interesting. And it connects this to Grice's maxims, those unspoken rules of conversation.
Yeah, like quantity, say enough, not too much. Quality, be truthful. Relation, be relevant. Manner, be clear. Irony often works by deliberately messing with these maxims.
How so? Give us an example.
Okay, take quantity. The study mentions ironic understatement. By saying less than is obviously true, like calling a raging fire a bit warm. You actually emphasize the reality by violating the maxim. How might Dickens use that?
Maybe like that perfectly clear line again. Drastically understating the confusion to highlight the ruler's ignorance.
Precisely. Or violating manner being deliberately unclear or ambiguous. Going off record can soften criticism or avoid direct confrontation.
And sarcasm. We all know that one.
The study calls it a more hostile form, verbal aggression. Like that taxi driver example, saying you came somewhere just for the scenery, when it's clearly not true. It has that sharp edge.
Then there's satire.
Right, using irony to expose vices or foolishness, often through exaggeration, like mocking overly complex jargon.
What about ironical understatement again? You said it's saying less, not the opposite.
Yeah, it's about minimizing things, saying he's a little upset when someone's throwing furniture. He's
Right.
humorously downplaying the reality.
Okay, and echoic irony.
That's repeating someone else's words, but twisting the meaning, often to mock the original statement. You echo it, but everyone knows you mean something different now.
And pretense.
That's pretending to believe something you don't, like saying, what a lovely day, during a hurricane. You pretend agreement to show the opposite. The fine friend example is perfect.
Got it. And lastly, ironical interjections.
Little phrases like, oh, great, when something bad happens, or that dear me example. The context flips the literal meaning.
So this study actually counted these up in the novel.
It did. Satire apparently comes out way on top, almost half the instances. Then sarcasm, pretense, understatement, and interjection. Echoic irony wasn't used much instrumentally, it seems.
Wow. What does all that satire tell you?
It strongly suggests a critique, doesn't it? He's using irony as a tool for social commentary, not just for laughs.
The study also gives specific examples from the book, right?
Yes, like dramatic irony. We know Corton's potential sacrifice before he does. Situational irony, Mr. Lorry. The man of business who's actually deeply kind.
Or verbal irony, like Laurie calling himself a talking machine, or Jerry Cruncher being the trustworthy craftsman.
Right, despite his resurrection side job.
So the bottom line on irony.
Dickens is using a whole toolkit of ironic devices very intentionally. It adds layers, conveys hidden messages, and really pulls the reader in. It's complex stuff.
Okay, let's pivot again. The historical context for the French Revolution. This is huge for A Tale of Two Cities. The materials from A Noise Within seem useful here.
Absolutely fundamental. The revolution, starting around 1789, was this massive attempt to completely overthrow the monarchy and the old feudal system. Big Enlightenment ideas were driving it.
And the causes were deep-rooted, weren't they?
Oh, yeah. A Noise Within points to loads of factors. The middle class, bourgeoisie, wanting power, peasants fed up with their lot, Enlightenment philosophy spreading, France being broke after helping America.
Plus population growth, bad harvests, and a monarchy that just couldn't cope. A real powder keg.
Definitely. Then the key events unfold. The financial crisis forcing Louis XVI to call the Estates General.
Then the Third Estate breaking away. The National Assembly. The Tennis Court Oath.
And bam, the Bastille falls in July '89. That's the flashpoint, followed by the great fear of the countryside.
But it got much darker after that.
It did. War, the king and queen executed, Robespierre and the Reign of Terror, just extreme violence and fear.
Until Napoleon eventually steps in and takes over in 1799, basically ending the revolutionary phase.
Right. And remember, Dickens is writing this decades later in 1859, looking back with historical hindsight.
A Noise Within also lists key terms we see in the novel Bastille, Guillotine, Reign of Terror, The Three Estates. Knowing what these mean helps a lot.
And the main players, Louis VI, Marie Antoinette, Robespierre, Napoleon. They're the real history behind the fiction.
They also pull out a key theme. Duty versus desire.
Yeah, characters torn between what society expects and what they personally want. Ms. Pros's loyalty, Laurie's dedication, even Darnay going back to France despite the danger.
It's interesting hearing actor perspectives, too. Carton as a self-perceived failure finding redemption?
And the chilling relevance of that revolutionary chaos to modern times, the need for courage, plus just appreciating Dickens' detailed characters.
Even things like costume design reflecting the two cities' cool blues for England, earthy tones for France, and the spy Bersad embodying shifting loyalties.
It all just shows how history and themes are woven into every part of the story.
Okay, now for something a bit more philosophical, this paper on intimacy and the inscrutable self. It starts with this night shadows idea.
Yeah, it's this concept that every person is ultimately a deep secret, a mystery, even to those closest to them. There's a fundamental unknowability.
The narrator really ponders this, right? That feeling that you never fully know someone.
Exactly. The paper talks about Dickens' metaphors for this.
Mm-hmm.
The inner self as buried treasure or unfathomable water, hidden behind the rapages of the outer self.
Which ties into the Victorian era's fascination with a hidden inner life, separate from outward appearances. Carlyle's influence, looking beneath the surface.
Right. But there was also this Victorian anxiety about deception and a real value placed on sincerity, having your outside match your inside. So this idea of everyone being inherently hidden created a tension.
A real conflict. And Sidney Carton seems like a prime example.
Definitely. The paper analyzes him as someone whose inner self is a mystery even to himself, often described with metaphors of death, like he's internally empty or lost.
But then there's Mr. Lorry. He's seen as a seer of secrets, dreaming of bringing someone back from being buried alive.
He represents a kind of hope, doesn't he? Maybe a way to bridge that gap, to overcome that inscrutability, that isolation.
Interestingly, the paper argues that the revolutionary push for total transparency in France actually backfired.
Yeah, it led to more isolation, not less. Forced openness and surveillance didn't create intimacy.
So what's the alternative? The paper suggests compassion.
Exactly, that's the key. When seeing or revealing the inner self happens with compassion, with empathy, that's when intimacy becomes possible. Without it, exposure just leads to judgment and isolation.
Like the difference between the crowd staring hatefully at Darnay versus Lucy's compassionate look that Carton craves.
Powerful contrast. And the paper points to examples. Lucy and Laurie helping Dr. Manette without prying. Carton's sacrifice, which is deceptive on one level but deeply compassionate.
Even Laurie keeping Manette's relapse secret is framed as compassionate.
Right, protecting him. So the conclusion is that compassion allows for connection, even people remain partly mysterious to each other. Like Carton and the seamstress at the end, they connect through shared feeling, not full disclosure.
Let's look at that Reddit discussion now. It's always interesting to see how people react today. Someone started off with mixed feelings.
Yeah, but the comments quickly praised the opening and the ending, and one called the Sidney-Lucy relationship surprisingly mature, maybe not the typical toxic romance.
Someone else really focused on the Reign of Terror setting, that feeling of paranoia.
Right, emphasizing the grim reality versus maybe the historical ideals of the Revolution.
And lots of love for Dickens's writing style itself. That paragraph-by-paragraph artistry, maybe because it was serialized originally.
Could be. Someone also brought up Darnay's decision to go back to France that always sparks debate. Seems like a crazy risk.
Yeah, definitely. And the Carton-Lucy dialogue was highlighted as beautiful. Plus the idea that it's maybe not typical Dickens' more brutal, fewer quirky side characters, perhaps?
And it finished with that classic debate. Historical fiction, how much accuracy versus artistic license?
One view saying, hey, it's fiction, let the author create. The other asking about the impact on how readers see history, the author's responsibility.
It just shows the book still makes people think and argue, which is great.
Okay, wrapping things up, let's focus directly on how the novel reflects the French Revolution itself. Dickens clearly wasn't neutral.
Not at all. The sources agree he captures both the initial, maybe naive idealism and the absolute horror it descended into. For his readers, the Revolution was this huge, scary event in recent memory.
And he draws that contrast. England might be flawed, but France during the Terror is lethal.
Right. The story builds towards the birth of the French Republic, but the focus is heavily on the terror, the injustice, the mob violence, like that horrific scene of the mob sharpening weapons.
And his portrayal apparently really influenced how British people saw themselves and France. He clearly shows the aristocracy's cruelty, the taxes, indifference, the wine cask scene as the cause of the revolution.
He sympathizes with the peasants needing liberation, definitely, but he does not hold back on criticizing their violent methods. He shows the dark side of the revolutionaries, too.
So there's an ambivalence there.
Very much so. He supports the need for change, but condemns the brutality. It's like he's saying power corrupts, whether it's nobles or commoners holding it.
Which brings us back to that opening line again, best of times, worst of times. It perfectly captures that duality. And the revolution directly impacts characters like Dr. Manette, personally.
And the sources remind us of the real-world context. The hunger, the debt from wars like the American Revolution, the failing system, all fuel for the fire.
It's notable that the good characters don't really represent a hopeful future within France in the novel. They find refuge in England.
Yeah, there's a kind of poetic justice. Maybe the sympathetic find peace elsewhere. The villains meet the guillotine in Paris.
People mention Carlyle's History of the Revolution as an influence, but Dickens had his own take, maybe more critical of the violence itself.
Ultimately, he used this specific, huge historical event to explore really universal human feelings. Fear, love, sacrifice, cruelty in the face of massive upheaval.
So, bringing this all together, what have we unpacked today? Chapter 1 is clearly a masterclass in setting the scene.
Absolutely. Dickens lays out the economic tensions, uses literary tools like irony brilliantly, and foreshadows the revolutionary storm from the very beginning.
We've also seen the novel's complex view of the revolution, acknowledging the oppression that caused it, but also the terrible violence it unleashed.
A really nuanced perspective, not black and white.
And maybe most profoundly, those themes about how we're all mysteries to each other and how crucial compassion is if we want any real connection. That feels very timeless.
It really does. It resonates far beyond 18th century France.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you listening. How do these themes, social injustice, the dynamics of revolution or radical change, and that deep human search for connection across our differences, how do they play out today? What kinds of rapages might we need to look past in our own world to find that understanding and compassion Dickens explores?